I'm Lola Blanc.
And I'm Megan Elizabeth.
And we're the hosts of Trust Me, the podcast about cults, extreme belief, and the abuse of power.
Now on Podcast 1.
We're real-life cult survivors.
And we're here to tell you anyone can join a cult.
If you've ever dived headfirst into a new self-help program,
or believed wholeheartedly in a spiritual practice,
or even just trusted someone with your life,
guess what? You're just as susceptible as everyone else.
No one is safe, especially not Megan.
I'm the most susceptible.
We want to debunk the myth that people who join cults are uneducated or naive or broken, because anyone can be manipulated by a narcissist or feel good in a new group they've joined.
And we should know we both have been.
Join us every week as we explore the world of extreme belief,
talk to survivors and experts,
and share our own experiences with cults and the abuse of power.
Don't be fooled. You might be next.
Get new episodes of Trust Me every Wednesday on Podcast 1, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you get your podcasts.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on the prosecutors, it is perhaps the most famous case in all of true crime. On January 13th, 1999, in Baltimore, Maryland, a high school student named Hae Min Lee vanished. When her body was found, buried in a shallow grave, suspicion fell on her ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed. But even now, people wonder whether he murdered her or was he framed. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my ready or not co-host, Alice.
Hey, Brett, I am not ready, but we are doing this because we said we weren't going to do Adnan, and...
We never said we weren't going to do it. People say that. We never said that.
We never said that, but it's probably been by far the most requested case, but you guys... It takes so long to research a case of this, of this proportion. And it's, we thought we might as well do it while I have yet another newborn. Why not?
Exactly. Well, that was the thing. While Alice was recovering from her pregnancy, we basically spent that entire time doing this outline. So we've watched the documentaries. We've read the trial transcript. We've listened to Serial again. We listened to Undisclosed. We did it all. And the outline for this case, just so you guys know, is about 35,000 words long, about 80 pages. To give you some idea, The Great Gatsby is 44,000 words long. So this is a significant undertaking. So I hope everybody's ready for it. We are going to try and do this. This is the first time I ever cut anything out of an outline because I was like, we got to cut this thing down. But we are committed to doing this in a reasonable amount of episodes.
And I don't know if this makes me like a great mom or a terrible mom, but I listened to all of everything Adnan, both on video and on audio podcasts, like without speakers because my hands were full and I was always running around with a newborn. So baby Brittany knows a lot about this case.
Yes, baby Brittany does. That poor girl, she's going to have a lot of questions when she gets older.
A lot of questions.
There's a ton of stuff you guys can listen to or read if you're interested in this case. We mentioned some earlier. There's also Crime Weekly, which did a very deep dive on this. We listened to that as well. There's Adnan's Story by Rabia Chowdhury. The case against Adnan Syed, which I believe was on HBO, and then every podcast in America. So, you don't have to take our word for it. We're going to put a lot of resources up on the website, so you can take a look at that. There's tons of stuff. You can read the trial transcripts, all that stuff. You can go to the primary sources if you want to, and I suggest that you do. But as we always do, we're going to dive into this, and we're really looking forward to doing it, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So let's get this started. We got a long way to go. On the off chance that there is anyone listening to this who does not know this story, in 1999, Adnan Syed and Hae Min Lee were high school seniors at Woodlawn High in Baltimore, Maryland. In 1998, they dated for 10 months or so, but by the middle of December, they had broken up, and Hae had her eyes on a new guy, a 20-year-old coworker named Don. On January 1st, 1999, Dawn and Hae had their first date.
And everything was going great for Hae. She was an excellent student, a star athlete, and she was in love. But it all came crashing down on January 13th. That day, Hae was supposed to pick up her cousin after school, but she never showed up. A search was launched, but no trace of Hae was found. Then, on February 9th, a worker at a local community college stops in Leakin Park to relieve himself. He walks back a little ways from the main road to do his business, and he suddenly sees black hair sticking out of the ground. He has found Hae's body. The police look at Alonzo Sellers, the man who found the body, and Don, Hae's boyfriend. But it's not long before they begin to focus on Adnan Syed. They pull his cell phone records and begin to talk to the people he called that day. When they talk to Jennifer Pusateri, one of the numbers that comes up, she doesn't have much to say. But then, the next day, Jennifer shows up with her lawyer. She tells the police that her friend Jay was with Adnan that day and that Jay told her Adnan killed Hae. The police pick up Jay, and he tells them that he was with Adnan when he buried Hae's body. And he's able to give the police a crucial piece of information they did not have up to this point: the location of Hae's car.
So at that point, the police arrest Adnan. Forensic evidence is sparse, but with Jay's story and corroborating cell phone data, Adnan is eventually convicted. And yet, to this day, people wonder whether he is really guilty. They question whether Jay's story, which is all over the place and contradicts both itself and the reality of time and space, holds up to scrutiny, and they wonder if much of it was provided by the police themselves. They ask whether the cell phone data, which was in its infancy at the time of the murders, can really be trusted. And they wonder whether the real killer is still out there, while Adnan Syed is an innocent man convicted of a murder he did not commit.
So there's a very short summary for those of you who may not know this case. So let's go ahead and dive in, because there are a lot of players. You've heard about some of them in the summary, and if you followed this case at all, you probably know them intimately well. Let's start with what this case is all about, and that is Hae Min Lee. She was born in Seoul, and Hae had emigrated with her mother to the United States, eventually settling in Baltimore, Maryland, where she ultimately met Adnan Syed. She was a star student and an athlete, and there was really no limit to what Hae might have accomplished. I mean, you've probably heard lots of personal testimonials of who Hae was, and she truly seems like one of those people who lit up a room. You can see it in her picture. She had a big smile. She was outgoing. She was, I think, any immigrant mother's dream. And unfortunately, her life was cut much too short.
And I think that's true. I think that's probably the one thing everyone can agree on, whatever you think about this case, is that she had a very bright future ahead of her. And all murders are tragic. They're all awful. All deaths are terrible. But when you really dive into this case and you read her diaries and you read some of the stuff she wrote for school and you see what people said about her, it is one of those that it just makes you shake your head. And it is a terrible tragedy that this happened at all. And we wanted to start with Hae because in the wake of Serial, which is maybe the most important podcast, certainly for true crime ever, maybe for the entire podcasting industry, there's a lot of focus on Adnan Syed, and you understand why that is. If he's wrongfully convicted, he's been in prison for 20 years, and, that's also a tragedy. And I think the thing other people can also agree on is that Adnan had a bright future ahead of him. Adnan was Hae Min Lee's ex-boyfriend at the time of her death. He will be convicted and serve more than 20 years in prison for her murder, having been released only this year when his conviction was temporarily vacated before being reinstated by the Maryland Appeals Court. In fact, today he filed a petition for cert to the Maryland Supreme Court in an attempt to overturn the appeal court's decision. Maybe by the time you hear this, we'll know more about that, but that's sort of where that case sits right now. He is still free currently, though the ultimate outcome of his case is unknown. Given how long we'll probably be talking about this, who knows? By the time we finish, we may have an update for you on that.
The next player, of course, is Don. And Don had been Hae's boyfriend for less than 2 weeks when she disappeared. Just by the way, it's like, if he's innocent, this is terrible timing for you, right? Because you are the current boyfriend, so you're going to be on the list of suspects. And it's not like you've been dating her for a long time. 2 weeks seems like a long time when you're 17 or 18, but it is not long in the grand scheme of things.
Don is super unlucky. Super unlucky.
Super unlucky. And you'll see more so why we say that. But he was a little bit older than Hae. Hae obviously was still in high school, and Don was 20 years old. You'll sometimes see this as 22, but that's actually not correct. And she was 18 years old, which is one reason that Hae liked him. His Camaro also helped. You can imagine being in high school, dating the older guy with a cool sports car. What's not to like? Now, Don was interviewed in the early days of the investigation, but there was little evidence of his involvement, and the authorities settled on Adnan as a more likely suspect.
And one of the reasons they did that is Jay Wilds. Jay Wilds was a person who had gone to Woodlawn High School with both Adnan and Hae. He is Adnan's supposed accomplice in this murder, particularly after the murder was committed. He told police the story of Hae's murder and where to find her car. He was not the first person to go to the police, though. That was Jennifer Pusateri. Jennifer was Jay's friend, perhaps his best friend. She actually picked him up that night, the night of Hae's murder, and was the first to go to the police with the story of what happened. Obviously, we will talk about Jay and Jennifer quite a bit as we go forward. There's some other people who are important in this case, and their names will come up a lot, so we wanted to mention them as well, even though they're not as directly connected to the case. Krista Myers. Krista was friends with both Adnan and Hae. She was a confidant of both, and she's going to appear repeatedly in this story.
And there are additional friends who come up here. Christy Vinson was friends with Jennifer Pusateri, the first one who went to the police with Jay's story. And to a lesser extent, she was also friends with Jay Wilds. On the day of Hae's murder, she may have had some interesting visitors that we'll talk more about later. Then there's Stephanie, Jay's girlfriend. She has been dating him since she was in the 6th grade, and Jay was in the 7th grade. Adnan had known Stephanie since at least 2nd grade and was good friends with her. Then there's Bilal Ahmed. Bilal had known Adnan since he was in the 6th grade. He was a prominent member of Adnan's mosque, and he and Adnan have a close enough relationship that Bilal buys him a cell phone and puts it on his own bill. Bilal will eventually be arrested for sexual abuse, and if you believe the document filed by the state's attorney to vacate Adnan's conviction, he's also a suspect in Hae Min Lee's case. Then there's Alonzo Sellers. Sometimes he's referred to as Mr. S for reasons that have never been entirely clear, but Sellers discovered Hae's body. As such, he was an automatic suspect. We've talked about this before. If you find a body that's not like open, well, even if it's open, if you find the body, you're going to be one of the first suspects that the police want to look into to rule out. And he's still a very popular suspect with some people, and he's even listed as one of 2 suspects in the motion to vacate. Then there's Christina Gutierrez, Adnan's attorney, and to some, the cause of his defeat at trial. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about that a lot.
Yeah, and obviously that's not all the people. If you follow this case closely, if you're very familiar with it, you know there's a bunch of other people who are going to come up, but we at least wanted to give you some of the names that pop up, because this story can get confusing. There's a lot of different angles about this. This is not a forensics heavy case. So we're often talking about people, what they remember, what they saw, when they saw it. And you're going to hear those names a lot. So let's talk about the things we know for sure. Eventually we're going to get into the timeline, which is where we normally start, but felt like this case needed a little bit of winding up.
You know, when you read like tomes or like literary just stalwarts in the field, you have like an appendix of characters. I hated those books in like AP literature when you had to like go to the back and be like, you know, the father of James, of, you know, Morton and whatnot, and that going on these like family trees, and you never know who's related to whom. But this case is kind of that complicated, and we're going to be talking about them kind of off the cuff. We want you guys to have a touchstone to be able to come back to, so that if you ever, you know, forget who the characters are, you can come back to the first episode and hopefully have an index.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you have an introduction to the book. This is kind of what that is.
You know, like really famous people have famous people do the introductions to the introductions.
Right.
We're doing our own introductions to the introductions, so...
And look, I think this is going to help you as we go through this because this case has always kind of confused me. I'll admit, I listened to Serial. I was like, he probably did it. And then moved on with my life. Like this case did not grab me in the way it grabbed a lot of people. But once we started doing this podcast, it became evident very quickly that I was alone in that everyone else was completely obsessed with this. And once Adnan's conviction was vacated, and we talked a little bit about the legal aspects of that and some of the wonky stuff that happened, everybody's like, you gotta dive into this. You gotta learn it. So that's what we're doing. And once you start looking at it, you listen to Serial. I don't know about you guys. I found Serial to be very confusing at first. It took a while for me to figure out what in the world was going on and what I was supposed to be paying attention to. So our hope is that by going through this, you'll have sort of a better idea of what you're supposed to be paying attention to as we spend the next who knows how many long episodes talking about this. So the things we know for sure, and there's not a lot of them. Number one, Adnan and Hae dated for a significant period of time. It was an intense relationship filled with highs and lows, and it ended sometime in December. By the first of the year, both Hae and Adnan were seeing new people. Number two, Hae made it to and through school on the day she disappeared and died, January 13th. She was alive until 2:15 when school let out. She was supposed to pick up her cousin from kindergarten by around 3:30. She did not do so, and it is likely that she was dead by that time. And the third thing, a thing we know for sure, Jay and Adnan were absolutely together off and on the day that Hae was murdered. It is not in dispute that Jay borrowed Adnan's car, and it is not in dispute that Jay had Adnan's cell phone for at least a good chunk of the day.
Number 4, we know that Jay lies a lot. We're going to hear a lot of stories from a lot of people. Some of those stories were told days or weeks after the murder. Some of them were told months after, and some years or decades after the murder. And these stories are all over the place. They change, they contradict themselves. Now, that doesn't mean these people are lying, but we do know that Jay is lying. Even if he admits that, his stories change because he lies. He has his reasons, and some of those reasons are also beyond dispute. He was selling marijuana and other drugs out of his grandmother's house. He had had negative interactions with the police before. He was a black man living in Baltimore. And those who think that Adnan is innocent will tell you he had other reasons to lie. The police were framing Adnan and needed him to back them up, or he was pressured into changing his story, or he sold Adnan out to avoid a more serious charge, like maybe he was the one who murdered Hae. But whatever the reason, what we do know is that Jay lies. We may not know which are the lies, but we know that there are lies because the story changes and he is contradicted, and also evidence contradicts what he says at certain times. This is not meant to be a controversial thing right now. It's kind of to set the stage. If we really want to fight about it, Brett, we guess we could. But baseline, I'm not saying what's a lie, just know that Jay lies.
I mean, Jay is the ultimate proof of one of our rules. You know, one of our rules is people lie, but doesn't make them a liar. I mean, we could have the house rule. We've been bringing up a house a lot lately. The house had the whole everybody lies. Jay's lying. He's lying a lot. And there are some people who Jay lies and they say, look, I can't believe anything he says. And I totally get that. And there are many aphorisms that go along with that. There's one in Latin that I can't remember, but it's basically faults in one, faults in all. So if somebody smarter than me wants to bring that up, they can. And that is a principle, and you can stand behind that. However, Jay is not unlike a lot of people who testify in cases like this. People who are involved in criminal activity, people who are involved to some extent to the murder and maybe don't want you to know how involved they were in it. He is going to lie, and he does lie. Figuring out the extent to which he's lying and whether or not you can get anything out of his testimony is something that we're going to talk about a lot as this continues.
And obviously, we have hindsight now. This matters a lot to what's happening present day. But baseline, Jay lies. So even though Jay lies, this is not to say that all of Jay's contradictions are because of lies. Some of them are the same things that affect all other witnesses, including Adnan. Time, stress. In the case of Jay, the fact that he was smoking marijuana that day, as even Adnan says, could lead to these contradictions. So number 4 and 5, I think, are very important to get straight. That Jay lies, but that not all of his contradictions are because of lies. There's a lot of factors we have to look at as to why those contradictions may exist, which honestly makes Jay's lies that much more difficult to parse through, because some of them are lies and some of them are maybe stress, misremembering things, being interrogated by the police. I get scared being interrogated by the police, and I didn't do anything wrong that I know of. So all these things can kind of create this pressure that change your testimony. And again, this is not unique to Jay. We see this in just about every single witness that we've ever either directed or cross-examined in court.
And, you know, the longer we do this, and I'm glad that we've done a couple hundred episodes before we did this case, because one thing you see both in our jobs and in all these cases is figuring out the tea leaves about what happened based on what people say when they're contradicting themselves and contradicting each other, may even be innocent, but they're saying things you know can't be true. Figuring out the truth there is not easy. It is particularly difficult in this case. One thing that a lot of people do that we're not going to do is they, you know, it's funny because they take Jay as gospel sometimes. Jay said it happened at this time, therefore Adnan must be innocent, because if it happened at that time, it couldn't have been Adnan. I mean, look, you gotta kind of treat Jay across the board as unreliable to a certain extent. And we're going to do that. We're going to try and get something out of him, but we're going to do that. And this kind of goes into our approach on this case. When you have a case that's been this well covered by so many people, books, documentaries, podcasts, entire podcast, not just podcast episodes, but entire podcasts. I think you kind of have to lay out for people what you're going to do. And given that people have forgotten or confused so much in this case that Jay and maybe others are lying, or at least woefully inconsistent, how should we approach this? What is the best way to look at this case? There are some analysis of this case, and I enjoyed them, but they spend multiple episodes trying to make sense of Jay's story or make them mesh together or compare and contrast them with what he tells the police to what he testifies to, or line them up with some sort of timeline to figure something out in a coherent way. We think that's a fool's errand, and not criticizing people who try to do that, but we just think it's pointless. At some point, we're going to talk about Jay's interviews and his statements, and you'll see for yourself how they contradict. When we talk about the timeline, there will be times where we say, in Jay's first statement, he says this thing happened here. In Jay's second statement, he says this thing happened here. And that's really for your information. We're not going to make any real effort to make sense of all that. We are making a conscious choice to look at the evidence that does not depend entirely on Jay's eyewitness testimony and determine whether or not it lines up with essentially 4 main points of Jay's testimony. You can go through everything he says, but there are 4 points that are really important, and 4 points that tell you if he's telling the truth about these 4 points, then Adnan is guilty. If he's not, then Adnan is innocent. So those 4 points. Number 1, Adnan gave Jay his car and cell phone that day. That's an easy one because that one's basically undisputed. Now, it gets a little bit more important when he gave him his car and when he had his cell phone. Number 2, Adnan had Jay pick him up after the murders and drop off Hae's car. Number 3, later, Adnan had Jay help him bury Hae's body in Leakin Park. And number 4, Adnan and Jay dropped the car off in an alley after the body was buried. Those are the most important things. When they smoked pot, where they smoked pot, who they got pot from, who they visited first, whether they ate at McDonald's. These are all things you can try and figure out to try and determine exactly what happened throughout the day. But honestly, they're not that important. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure those things out. Those 4 things will be our focus.
Absolutely. So those 4 things, and trust us, Jay says so many other things. So we're really parsing to what matters. So if we're prosecuting this case, we have to look at the evidence. We know that Jay's credibility, it's terrible. It's undisputedly terrible, but you're going to have to deal with that no matter what. So he is a witness in this case. But when you have a terrible credibility witness, you look at the evidence, and then if it matches up, okay, maybe we can look into that. If it doesn't match up, then you deal with, if they're your witness, you have to deal with the cross-examination that comes with that. So we absolutely agree that Jay's credibility is really just terrible. That's not in dispute. I think everyone agrees that his credibility is just shot. Now, that's, again, not that new, right? Most of the prosecution's witnesses are going to have some flaw, especially if they're involved in other illegal activity, because people tend to lie to cover themselves, even if it has nothing to do with something as bad as, say, a murder. They may just not want people to know that they smoke marijuana because they can still get in trouble for that. So I want to emphasize that Jay's credibility is bad, but so are actually most of Brett and my witnesses when we go to trial on these types of cases. Now, as we have said from the beginning of this podcast, just because you lie does not make you a liar. Certainly not about everything. But we think it is a mistake to take either extreme position, that Adnan is a murderer because Jay said so, or that Jay's testimony is utterly worthless because he lies a lot. We're going to take what Jay says, compare it to the evidence, and see where it shakes out, and not take either of those extremes. Because really the truth is, it's going to be found somewhere in between.
So that's what we're going to look at. Those are the things we're going to focus on. What we're not really focused on: the fairness of Adnan's trial. We've done 3 legal briefs episodes on the Adnan Syed case. 1 on ineffective assistance of counsel, and 2 on the recent decision to vacate his conviction. As we said in those episodes, they weren't really about his guilt or innocence. They were about the technical requirements of a fair trial. This podcast is about guilt or innocence. You can check out those episodes or one of the many other podcasts on this case if you're really interested in whether or not he got a quote-unquote fair trial. Doesn't mean we won't talk about some of this stuff. We will. I'm going to talk about the Brady violations, that kind of thing. That will come up because you can't really talk about the case without that, but it's not going to be our focus.
And that's a really big deal. So, we always say set the thesis. So when you write a brief, like an appellate brief, you always have something called a question presented because it frames how you're going to talk about anything. Adnan has been just covered ad nauseum. And for those of you who want to know about the fairness, just know where our focus is here because you guys have asked us, do we think he's innocent or guilty? So that's what we're going to focus on here. So when you come at us at like episode 8... around episode 8, maybe near the end, hopefully. And you're like, but what about the unfairness of the trials? Remember what we've said here. I think it's important to know what your questions are, just like in a legal brief, literally a legal brief, not our other podcast, what the questions are and how you're going to direct your analysis. So with all of that, that's a lot of groundwork to lay. Anybody have questions? I feel like we need to take questions and people have to raise their hands, but we're not really going to do that because then this episode will go on forever. But with all of that said, let's go ahead and dive in, and let's start with Adnan's story of the day of Hae's murder. It's often said that Adnan remembers nothing of the day, and this was reinforced by the podcast Serial, which begins with the premise that Adnan remembers nothing, and how could he, given it was just another day? I mean, I think the first episode, if you go back and listen to it, it goes on and on of how any teenager could possibly remember what they had for lunch yesterday. So how could Adnan remember some normal day for him where he had nothing to do with what's about to happen? But this is not entirely true. Adnan does remember some of January 13th, and here's his story of what he did that day. First, Adnan says he's known Jay since Adnan was in the 7th grade. They didn't really hang out until 1998 when Adnan started hanging out with Jay through Stephanie, remember Jay's girlfriend, and Adnan's best friend. Jay would provide weed to Adnan, and he says that he smoked weed with Jay fewer than about 10 times. So they were kind of friends through a friend, but they definitely smoked pot together.
So obviously we're going to talk in detail about January 13th, but this is essentially the story that Adnan tells in Serial. It's talked about some and undisclosed. You can read the notes that his defense attorneys took. I mean, that's where we're sort of drawing this from. So Adnan says he arrives at school around 7:45 and went to his photography class. In second period, he gave Stephanie, once again his best friend, a stuffed reindeer and a birthday card. At 10:50, he left school and went to Jay's house. He says he was worried that Jay had not gotten Stephanie a present. It was Stephanie's birthday, and Jay was notoriously flighty, and Stephanie is Adnan's best friend, and he wants to make sure that Jay is doing what he's supposed to do. So he goes to Jay's house to facilitate him getting this present. Earlier, he had called Jay, and Jay had said, yeah, I haven't gotten her anything yet.
That's a very responsible teenage boy.
You know, it is. I mean, this is one of those things that I sort of go over in my head. Does this make sense or not? Like, I would like to think that I would do something like that I would make sure that my, if your husband didn't get you a present, I would be like, hey, did you get Alice a present? I mean,
no,
I don't have to do that.
You would not.
What are you talking about? I totally would do that.
Okay, actually, let's go through this thinking exercise. So we are like many factors older than 17 and 18. So we're like, we've had a lot of life. We've had a lot of probably disputes when presents weren't bought in relationships. We've known each other for let's say 8 birthdays. In those 8 birthdays, I'm just curious, right? Like, we are very, very good friends, and we're also very good friends with each other's spouses. Have you ever asked my husband around my birthday if he got me a present in those 8 years? And have I ever asked your wife? And the answer for me is no, I haven't.
Well, no, but they're both very responsible people. Jay is not. And Adnan knows that. Like, Adnan knows that Jay most likely has not gotten Stephanie a present. So it's not a surprise to him that Jay didn't. So I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I totally hear what you're saying.
We're not going to go down this behavioral analysis point. I do just note that he is being a very conscientious teenage boy to make sure that his best girlfriend's boyfriend is getting her a present.
I mean, honestly, the reason I would do this if I was Adnan is because I wanted to date Stephanie. So yes, I got her a present, and at some point I'm going to let her know that the only reason Jay got her one is because I was looking out for her. That's what I actually be doing. And who knows? I mean, maybe
I agree with that. I agree with that. I could see that situation happening. Okay, yeah. Go on.
Jay had not gotten her a present. Shocker of shockers. So Adnan tells him that, hey, it's cool, man. You can borrow my car, and you can borrow my cell phone. Just drop me off at school, and you can go get her a gift. Now, he doesn't really remember what the two of them did between when he went to visit Jay and when he dropped him off at school. I don't know why he doesn't remember, because honestly, if they weren't planning the murder of Hae, they were probably smoking pot. That's what they did a lot. But he doesn't say that. He doesn't really remember what happened. All he remembers is Jay took him back around 12:45. That's Adnan's story. At this point, Jay borrows Adnan's car and Adnan's new cell phone, which is in the glove compartment of the car where Adnan had left it. After Jay dropped Adnan off, Adnan goes to the counselor's office because he needs to get a letter for his college application. He's a senior in high school. Everybody's getting ready to apply for college. He actually will be admitted into college while he is in jail awaiting trial for Hae's murder. He then goes to class around 1 o'clock, which was about 10 minutes late, but Adnan was always late. That's another thing. He was always late to class, so no big deal. And anyways, he had a good excuse because he was getting that letter from the guidance counselor. In reality, he got there at about 1:27, which we know based on the teachers writing things down, but that's not that far off. Adnan's giving himself a little bit more credit than he should, but he gets there about 1:27. It's not much of a discrepancy, but it is an example of how everyone in this case gets their times wrong constantly.
And that makes it difficult because if you heard what we were talking about earlier of things we know about Hae's day, is that there's a very short timeline wherein things happen to Hae. And so when people's timelines are off by even 30 minutes, it can really throw everything to the wind. And which is why we kind of need to have hard evidence and compare people's testimonies and memory of what happened, weeks, days, months later to the evidence that we have. So Adnan continues to remember things. He knows that after classes ended, he hung around school waiting for track practice. He went to the library to check his email, and then he headed to track practice that started around 3 or 3:30. Coach Syed would later say that track actually started at more like 4 p.m. Jay was supposed to pick Adnan up after practice ended, which he did, and this would have been around 4 or 4:30. After that, he and Jay went to get something to eat. Now, it was Ramadan, and it was time for Adnan to break his fast. Then he and Jay hung out and smoked weed, what they do together. Adnan thinks he would have been home between 7 and 8 p.m. since he often took food to his father at the mosque before 8 p.m. prayers. After that, Adnan called some people on the phone, and then he went to bed. A normal day, in his words.
Now, he says it was a normal day, but of course there was something else that happened that he says happened while he was with Jay. And that's he gets a phone call from a police officer who tells him that Hae never picked up her cousin. and wants to know where she is and if he has any idea. We're going to talk about that phone call a lot, but it's one of those things. On the one hand, you have Adnan talking about how it's an ordinary day. But on the other hand, you have this event, this sort of defining event. Don't worry, we're going to get into this and whether it really was defining, whether he had reason to be concerned or not. But that is a little bit of a kink in the whole idea that this was just an ordinary day. There's some things about this story that are a little strange right off the bat. You know, Adnan, he has an interest. And look, one thing people need to remember about Adnan, people do the same thing with Adnan that they do with Jay. So people who think Adnan's guilty, they scrutinize everything Adnan says. And if he says something that's not true, that must mean he's a murderer. And they forget that he has reasons to shade the truth too. Jay is saying that he killed his girlfriend. Adnan has reasons to be like, we weren't that close. Right? Because if they're not that close, then would he really go to Jay as the person to help bury the body? So he has reasons to say that. They might well be much closer than that. Obviously, if Adnan's innocent, he let Jay borrow his car and his cell phone, which is a pretty big deal when you're 18 years old.
Angie has made it easier than ever to connect with skilled professionals to get all your home projects done well. If you own a home, you know how much work it can take. Whether it's everyday maintenance and repairs or making dream projects a reality, it can be hard just to know where to start. But now, all you need to do is Angie that and find a skilled local pro who will deliver the quality and expertise you need.
And Alice, you can turn to Angie with confidence no matter what the size of your home or the size of your project. Whether you've got a 100-year-old house like I do, where it seems like things are always breaking, or if you're renting and you're needing someone to help you with moving, installations, or cleaning, Angie is there for you, and they're there for you with confidence. So, Angie has over 20 years of home service experience, and they've combined it with new tools to simplify the whole process. Bring them your project online or with Angie's app, answer a few questions, and Angie can handle the rest from start to finish. Or they can help you compare quotes from multiple pros and connect instantly, which means you can take care of just about any home project in just a few taps. Because when it comes to getting the most out of your home, you can do this when you Angie that. Download the free Angie mobile app today or visit Angie.com. That's ANGI.com. Check them out today. Angie.com. ANGI.com.
And that's a great point, Brett. You absolutely see why Adnan would want to have some distance between him and Jay. But in Adnan's own words of what happened this day, the person he sees the most and most consistently and throughout the day is Jay. That's a lot of time to spend with someone, not to mention to loan your car and loan your phone to if you're not that close. So his own words kind of belie just how close he and Jay are. They are at least close enough that they see each other multiple times in one day. And at least in this one day, you know, he's saying that they smoke pot together like 10 times. They've already seen each other 3 or 4 times in this one day. And he admits to smoking pot with Jay that day. It's hard to believe that this is 1 out of 10 days that they hung out total together. And somehow, if this is the 10th of those 10 days, that in those 10 days they become this close, so close that he goes shopping with him. He feels comfortable enough with him to ask him if he's bought a present, because if you don't know someone well enough, they may take that offensively. Or how would you know that he was irresponsible enough that he wouldn't have gotten a present for Stephanie? Those sorts of things. So I just point out that in Adnan's own words, even though he says Jay's not that close of a friend, and I would probably say the same in Adnan's shoes, the story he tells, it at least indicates a closer relationship than, he's just a friend of a friend.
Guilty or innocent, Adnan and Jay were closer than Adnan wants to let on. And I totally understand why he would take that position, guilty or innocent. So, once again, maybe they're not that close and Adnan's letting him borrow the 2 most important things in his life, his car and his cell phone, which, by the way, he just got the day before. I mean, it's one thing, to let somebody borrow your phone when you've had it for a while, but he just got it the day before and he's going to let some guy drive off with it. Maybe. But I would think that indicates they're a little bit closer that maybe he wants to let on. Okay, so that's enough preliminary stuff. We always start with timelines because timelines are important, and we're going to do a timeline in this case. So let's start August 1995. Hae and Adnan meet on the first day of high school. They're in the 9th grade at Woodlawn High School, and in fact, they are in a magnet program. So Woodlawn has adopted this magnet program where essentially the smart kids, for lack of a better term, are all sort of in their own little section, their own little wing of the high school. They're taking their own classes. When I was in high school, we had honors classes. And all of us who were in honors classes, we took honors classes together, and we didn't really take that many classes with everybody else. And that's basically what they had going on here at Woodlawn. They also had block scheduling, which I also had in high school, which means their classes were really long. So instead of having 7 classes in one day, they would have like an hour and a half long class. They'd have these block classes, and they'd have different classes on different days, and sort of go back and forth on those. So they meet in this setting. Because they're in this magnet program, they're obviously going to be close. They're going to know each other well, but there's a little bit of a kink in that. While Adnan is at Woodlawn the whole time, in the years that follow, Hae actually kind of bounces around in between California, Florida, and Maryland. She spent some time in California with a man that she lives with her mom, that's sometimes described as her dad. He is not her father. Her father remained in South Korea when the family immigrated to the United States, but she would describe him as a father figure. And eventually, when she goes missing, some people wonder whether she went back to California to live with him. But so she bounces around a little bit, but she eventually ends up back at Woodlawn. In February or March of 1998, Hae and Adnan start dating. The story of how Hae and Adnan start dating, how they get together, has become a bit of a legend, with Sarah Koenig claiming on Serial that Adnan was in a competition to find out who could take the prettiest girl to prom, and Adnan asked Hae. In reality, they'd become a couple well before that. They were always going to go to prom together, and in fact, they did go to prom together. No one really knows exactly when they started dating or how long they started dating, but there are references to 11 months when they broke up in December. So it seems like January, February, March is a likely period for when they start dating. So on April 1st, 1998, Hae buys her diary, which the world will eventually read. I read the whole thing cover to cover and felt terrible about it. And, just like, that's the thing about true crime, right? I mean, I don't want to get off on some big tangent about the ethics of true crime, but reading this 17/18-year-old girl's diary cover to cover is something. And it's kind of funny because when you read it in her first entry, she actually talks about whoever reads this diary. Like, I hope in the future, whoever reads this diary is somebody who comes to it with, an open heart and all this other stuff. And you really learn a lot about her as a person. And I mean, I'm not going to say you should all go out and read her diary because that seems a little strange, but it changes your perspective of this case when you read her diary.
She pours out her heart in her diary. And I was the same way. Like, I literally wrote in spiral bound notebooks everything that I felt, like the boring and the exciting. And that's what she does. And I love that because you see how articulate she was and also how emotionally deep she was at such a young age. Of course, I mean, it sounds like a teenage girl's diary, but she talks about things that are important to her, and they're important to everyone, just on different, it changes as you go through life, but she kind of pours out her heart on these pages. And I think that's why I felt bad reading them. It's part of the case, and it's very important to kind of know what was going on because it helps verify the timelines of what's going on to her ultimate murder. But it's hard to read because it is so raw and she is so honest in it. And she has a lot of awareness. Like, she's writing it almost knowing that someone's going to read it later on. I did that too when I was a teenager. I guess I just thought everyone would think what I had to write was interesting. But not to say that she wrote for an audience, but she was aware that she wasn't just existing in herself.
My favorite part is when she writes in her diary that she knows her brother is reading it and he needs to stop. That's like it's a great part. And also tragic because it's her brother who to this day is the face of seeking what in his mind is justice, which is keeping Adnan Syed in prison. But in any event, so we have this diary, and it is going to be important, and we're going to talk a lot about it, and we are going to read from it. And in fact, on April 1st, when she gets that, the very first entry she makes, she notes that she has Adnan, and she says she might actually love him. On April 5th, Hae writes in her diary that Adnan is moving a little too fast for her, but she is looking forward to junior prom. People speculate about what this means, and the obvious assumption is that it's physical, but it's clearly not. And if you read the rest of her diary, you realize that at this point, they haven't kissed, for instance. So when she says that Adnan is moving a little too fast for her, it seems pretty clear that he is becoming attached to her in a more deeply emotional way than she is ready for. Now, she's very quickly going to reach that same place, but at this point, sort of early on in their relationship, he's a little too, I mean, I hate to say possessive because that has some pejorative connotations to it, but he's more into this relationship than she is. I'll put it that way, at April 5th. But she's still looking forward to junior prom. And as we're going to read, she's going to talk a lot about junior prom and what happens on that. And this junior prom is an incredibly important event in their relationship and really cements their relationship as how serious it's going to be. So on April 25th, Adnan and Hae go to prom, and it could not have gone better. So she says in the diary that she had so much fun. Me and Adnan were dancing like crazy, hugging, and she puts this in caps, all caps, and kissing. I swear, he is the sweetest guy. Let me tell you why. He was the prom prince, and she puts that in all caps. And Stephanie McPherson, this is his best friend and Jay's girlfriend, was prom princess. And traditionally, they were supposed to dance together to my song. And this is a moment out of time if there ever is one. Casey and JoJo's All My Life. I tried to act natural and not jealous, or unjealous, she says. But it did kind of bother me. But I took the pic of them dancing and sat next to Deb and went on about how neat it is for Adnan to be the prince. 10 seconds later, guess who's dancing with me and not with Stephanie? Adnan. Now, how can I not fall in love with this guy? Of course, I gave him his first kiss on the lips. Then I totally fell in love with him.
I mean, it really is so descriptive and beautifully written for like a teenage high school girl. I mean, Casey and JoJo, I don't know if you had some romantic dances to that. That was middle school for me.
Like you.
I didn't ask for a serenade, but thank you for that.
And I finally found you.
This is very serious. This is an important day in their relationship, Brett.
It was very important. It's a great song. I'm not knocking the song. It's a great song.
Back to that. I mean, her words are, you can feel how ebullient she is. I mean, she is just open arms and, pouring out her heart to Adnan and to this diary. And this is, I mean, can you imagine if the prom prince, who was your date, kind of like left the princess or prom queen in order to come dance with you? I mean, it does sound like a fairy tale. And this is not written like a story after the fact. This is her words after the prom. I mean, this is what she's thinking at the time. As this has been kind of dramatized after the fact, this was this dramatic to her at the time. And when you see her handwriting, you can see it. I mean, things are in, bold and underlined and 3D print because she's just so animated even in her writing. I mean, her words are jumping off this page. This was real for her. Sure, they started dating a few months ago, or a couple months ago, really, but this is probably like her first love. The way she's pouring herself onto this page is heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking because I think you really see just how young and innocent she is. I think I even forget that Hae is a young girl because she's talked about, like lots of things. Lots of people have kind of extrapolated what their relationship meant or, what she should or should not have done. But like, these are just young kids at the junior prom. I mean, all of us have done stupid things as young kids. And I don't think when she wrote this, she ever thought that she would not see the next year. And that, I don't know, that's just really heartbreaking.
Yeah. And we're going to continue to read through her diary. And as you read it, I mean, it's so real, and it's obviously real because, man, she has huge mood swings. I mean, she is like swinging back and forth between loving Adnan and hating Adnan and loving other people. And it's a unique look into a relationship. And look, I'm sure there's some people out there who think, why are we talking about this? What is the point of this? Remember, if Adnan did this, it's a crime of passion. He would have murdered her it wasn't some sort of cold-blooded, premeditated murder, even if he had thought about it beforehand and talked about it beforehand. It was something that came from a place of deep passion. And knowing about their relationship and knowing sort of how it was in the days when it was good, I think tells you a lot about what may have happened eventually when things went bad.
So we learn a lot more from Hae's diary. On May 1st, Hae records in her diary that Adnan brought her a single rose to physics class and gives it to her in front of everyone. And she loves this. I mean, this is like Shakespearean. He's a romantic. This is incredibly romantic to do. And she's eating it up as well. I would too. I would eat it up today as not a high schooler. And so I'm going to read you what she wrote about this on May 1st, 1998. Adnan is the sweetest guy. I love him to death. Guess what he did? He was supposed to go to his mentor right after third period. Guess what he did instead? He went out and picked up a single rose for me. And he gave it to me in physics in the middle of class. Everyone was staring. All I could do was just look surprised and just kiss him in the middle of class. All day, I walked around with my rose. Everyone was telling me how cute it is and all. I got lots of oohs and cute. It was lovely. I came home and put it in the heart vase I got from prom. I can't believe he did it. It's so sweet. Now, how can I not love a guy like this? I mean, this girl is, again, this is young love and everything. Again, I can't emphasize this enough because I think it's been dramatized so much. Their relationship, them as people, they're seen as characters now in documentaries, in podcasts, in movies, whatever. But from her own words, life is dramatic. Is so full when you're a teenager and like hormones are raging and they are just utterly in love. And he is so sweet to do this. I mean, this is like, I don't know the last time I've gotten a flower. Maybe you can ask my husband if he'll do that. But you can see just how overflowing she is. And this is kind of right on the heels of junior prom, which was this magical night for them as well. Now, when Hae's car is located after her death, a floral paper is found in her back seat on top of a map book she was known to keep in the driver's side door. This is back in the days before Google Maps. I too had like a atlas map in my car. And the testimony is vague about what is wrapped inside, but the police inventory is not. So we know what it is. It's a rose and baby's breath. Adnan's prints, including his finger and palm prints, are found on the floral paper. So this is probably the rose or a rose that Adnan had given to her. I think it's fair to say that he's kind of into big gestures, big public gestures at that. And he's into presentation. You know, a single rose that's very romantic. And so likely this rose and baby's breath kind of wrapped up in floral paper was another one of these gestures by Adnan.
And we're going to come back to that gesture later and talk about it more. But one thing that's interesting in this case, there are fingerprints obviously in Hae's car. And those fingerprints are used against Adnan. And a lot of people say things like, look, Adnan was in her car all the time. They could have happened at any time. And I think that's true. This is interesting. And like I said, we're going to come back to it. And we're going to talk more about it. But it is a strange callback to this moment in time when everything was good. And then Hae disappears. She's found murdered. The police find her car. And what's in the backseat? A rose wrapped in floral paper with Adnan's fingerprints on it.
One thing I want to note about these diary entries, whatever you think about them, that they're ooey gooey, like disgusting, or they're so sweet and innocent. What matters here is that we see grand gestures by Adnan, but it can come out in two ways. The recipient can think this is disgusting and ew and gross. I remember like being on the receiving end of kind of grand gestures in high school from people I did not have any interest in. And I'd be like, ew. That is not the case here. So whatever you take from her diary entries, what we know from this is that there were grand gestures of kind of romance and they were received very well. So if you want to call it that he's coming on strong, or he's trying to be possessive early on to show everyone that he owns her because he gets, in the middle of physics class to give her a rose. Okay, fine. That's one way to read it. But whatever it is, I think it matters how she receives it. Because if she's receiving it as this is the most romantic thing ever, that's a very different situation than if she was writing like, ugh, this guy who's obsessed with me showed up in the middle of class with a rose and totally embarrassed me in front of everyone. So that's why her diary is relevant, because we know these grand gestures happened. How she receives them gives you an insight into how she views Adnan. So take that into consideration when we're reading these. We're not just reading her diary entries for fun. We're trying to get inside how she receives these grand gestures. Let's move forward to August 27th. Hae decides she's going to break up with Adnan. Now, you may think this is like very fast timeline. Again, we're in high school, teenage years. This is actually probably a pretty typical timeline for a relationship in high school. So while she's like high and in love in May, by August, she's had enough of this relationship and it's time to break up. Now, Hae says that she's tired of lying and that she's lost herself in those lies. She says, quote, "Now it seems that every time I do something I used to do, like hanging out with Aisha, it seems to shoot through Adnan's heart. It seems like my life has been revolving around him. Where's me? How did I end up like this? I have completely changed myself to make him happy. Everything that bothered him, I tried to change. Why did I do that?" So you see now those grand gestures and how she's reacting. Now it's really changing. Now she feels like she's completely lost her identity. And honestly, I think a lot of high school relationships were like this, from the male and female side, where you kind of fall head over heels in love with someone quickly and you guys merge into each other's personalities, and those relationships can flame out quickly. So I don't think what she's describing is all that unique to teenage relationships.
And let me just say this, because I know this is such an interesting case. I know there are people out there who really don't like Adnan, who are like, see, he's an awful, controlling person. Like, this is exactly what happens when evil men control women and try and take their lives away. And I totally get that, and that's what it sounds like she's saying. When you read those words, it doesn't sound great. I mean, it sounds like coercive control, frankly. But they're also 18 and 17. And in high school, all relationships are toxic, and to a certain extent, right? Like, people haven't really figured out how they're supposed to be and how you're supposed to act and how you're supposed to treat each other. And so I don't know. I don't know that we necessarily can go completely overboard and say Adnan is a completely controlling, toxic, horrible person who was trying to isolate her and take her away from everyone she loved. That is what she's saying. I mean, she's saying that Adnan is trying to sort of have her all to himself. I will say this. If you listen to Serial, Sarah Koenig, who, look, I really liked Serial and I really liked her. At some point, she talks about how there's no evidence that Adnan's controlling. There's totally evidence that Adnan is controlling. I mean, and that he was jealous and that he showed up when he wasn't supposed to. It's throughout Hae's diary, and this is just an example of that. But can you read a whole lot into this? I don't know. I think there's so much confirmation bias in this case, and I feel like you just have to be careful about it. You just have to kind of reserve judgment. This is an interesting thing that Hae says. It is an insight into their relationship, but it's probably not as definitive as some people want to make it out to be.
And that's a really fair point, Brett. Maybe she's being dramatic here. Maybe he wasn't controlling, but we have her own words to compare with themselves as well, because in her diary, Hae laments the loss of someone named Jake, who is apparently an old boyfriend who had passed away. And Jake, unlike Adnan, never told Hae what to do. So whatever you want to make of what this particular diary entry, Hae at least has another relationship or another experience where she felt it was less controlling than what she's experiencing now with Adnan. And this isn't just like a one-off entry here. This is actually in keeping with other diary entries where Hae talks about being tired of Adnan always telling her what to do and who to see. Aisha Pittman would later tell Serial that Adnan was constantly paging Hae to find out where she was and even dropping by their girls' outings when he was not supposed to. So we have Hae's own diary entries, but then also Aisha, who is one of Hae's good friends, kind of corroborating that sort of behavior from Adnan. But whatever the truth, Hae's reconsideration of their relationship doesn't last long.
And Aisha Pittman is another person that we probably should have talked about when we were sort of laying out people. She was very good friends with Hae. She was also friends with Adnan. She's going to come up a lot, as you can see. And she is an important person. And she had really good insight into these relationships. So we're at a point in this relationship where Hae she's having second thoughts and she's thinking, I need to break this off. I'm losing myself in this relationship and I want to have myself. And so she's going to go off on her own, but we're going to see soon that doesn't last very long. We're going to go ahead and sign off for today. However, we recognize that we got a lot to talk about and it's going to take a while. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually release 2 episodes this week. So you're going to get this episode and you're going to get the next episode, which will be the continuation of this timeline. So sorry, you're going to have to wait till tomorrow for the rest of it, but you're not going to have to wait until next week to get through some of this stuff. We know you guys have thoughts about this. This case is probably the most controversial case that exists in true crime. We know we're going to get things wrong. We're also going to have things that you think are wrong that aren't wrong because we're actually right and you're wrong. But we are happy to hear from you guys. Anything you think that we've messed up or we've gotten wrong, we want to do this right, and we want to be a source of positive information and not negative information. There's plenty of that in this case. I know that passions run high. I will say this, like most cases, the vast majority of people in this case, no matter where they fall, are reasonable people. I look forward to seeing the discussions about this in the gallery. And let me just say, to those of you out there who are toxic people who have decided that you're going to attack us no matter what we say, I mean, there are toxic people on the pro-Adnan side and there are toxic people on the anti-Adnan side. There is nothing you can do to us, and we do not care about you. So feel free to get as mad as you want to get, and not going to change what we're going to say. We're going to do this case in the most straightforward approach we can and give you the most unbiased approach we can. And at the end of the day, hopefully we can all reach some sort of truth. So, Alice, with that said, is there anything you want to add?
Oh my gosh, you're going to have people sent to our houses with pitchforks after that little rant. No, but truly, Brett's right. I mean, we're not afraid. And we've never wanted to do cases just to recycle information that's already out there. We're hoping to bring a new perspective and to kind of cut to the evidence in this case and present it to you because honestly, it's been covered so many times. We don't need to rehash old ground. And so that's what we're attempting to do here. And we're coming at this with an open mind and open for discussion. So we welcome those discussions, and I'm always impressed with the insights you all are able to bring. And I look forward to having this dialogue with you guys for the next few weeks. There's still a lot more to the timeline, Brett, so come back tomorrow.
Yeah, and if you happen to be joining us for the first time, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for our social media. If you really love this, but you hated the ads, join us on Patreon, where you might actually get to have live recordings of episodes such as this one. We're recording this with a live audience right now of our patrons who are enjoying this, I hope, and are getting sort of a 5-week early preview of what we're going to be talking about. So thank you so much to all of you on Patreon who are patrons of the show. You're so great. We love you. You're the best. Not just saying that because you're all in the audience right now. And we hope that you are enjoying this as much as we are enjoying doing it. Well, Alice, I'm about to talk to you in 5 minutes when we're going to record episode 2 of this. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Remember, don't say what it is until we start, because I'm going to do that today on the prosecutors.
I know. People are going to freak out.
That's when they'll know. People are going to freak out. But we're not going to freak out because we're professionals.
Because we are professionals.
We're professionals.
All I do is be professional.
If it's terrible, we can always re-record it later.
That's a great point.
People be like, this is... Anyway.
I know. This is kind of hard, though, because I want to make sure my Audacity keeps recording, but I also have the outline up, but I also have I need 3 screens.
I know. I know. We need a lot big. Okay.
Hello,
They'll
Brett.
be here in like 5 seconds.
In like 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, while they're waiting to hear from us, I'm really excited we're recording live today because it gave me an excuse to shower for the first time in like a week.
That's awesome, Alice. It's so great that you're.
Oh, it's
you're
really
showering.
disgusting.
It's like ideal.
It's a streaming hot summer on Pluto TV featuring hit blockbusters during popcorn summer movies. Watch Mark Wahlberg try and solve a murder in Four Brothers, or go on an adventure with an Indiana Jones movie marathon. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies available live and on demand. Download Pluto TV on all